Amazing. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Chelsea Hackett. I'm currently serving as the Director of STEAM Engagement and Innovation in Science Discovery. Are any of you familiar with Science Discovery? Great. Some of you are, some of you may not be. So we're a division of continuing education, and we're really youth focused. So we bring STEM and arts integration into youth communities through a very intense summer camp program where we serve about 1,800 students a summer. We also do after school and teacher training and a lot of pushing into classrooms during the course of the normal school year. And they're always, I'm a new addition to Science Discovery, but we're always looking for more creative, interesting, science-engaged programs and graduate students and professors. So if any of you are interested, let me know. But today I'm going to talk about the program that I am serving as the project director for, and that's called Side by Side. So today we'll be thinking about binary breaking through youth-made art, science, bird, human exhibits. We have so many dashes in our description of our work. Great. So first, my background is in educational theater, so I'm often looking at embodied practices. So we're going to just do a really quick embodied practice to get us all present in the room. So can you find a partner?
Okay, now what?
Okay. You're going to be my partner.
Okay.
Okay, so sorry to our friends online. What you're going to do first is you're going to stick up your right thumb.
Yeah.
And then you're going to put your left hand over your partner's right thumb. Amazing.
Okay.
Now you have two objectives. When I say the name of a vegetable, your goal is to both grab your partner's thumb and keep your thumb from being grabbed at the same time. Nice, great. Yeah, you might not want to be over a table. Good correction. Okay, so you're listening for the name of a vegetable.
Right.
Okay.
Does tomato count?
I really skipped tomato. Okay. Apple, banana, strawberry, mango, broccoli. Okay. Give me a quick wave if you caught a thumb. Amazing. Wow. Okay, a lot of thumbs caught. Quick, this group. Give me a wave if you kept your thumb from getting caught. Okay. All right. But also at Side by Side, we're often looking at equity. So now it's the lefties' turns. So now we're going to put our left thumb up and our right hand over.
Oh, we got it.
Yeah.
And now we're going to listen for the name of the state we all live in. And that is not the emotional state. It is. All right. Nevada, Washington, California. Oh, I love that. Connecticut, Michigan, Minnesota, Colorado. Give me a wave if you were more successful. Yeah. Okay, amazing. So that's just a little teaser we have a limited hour together, but a quick example of ways that we in our program and myself and some of my collaborators bring embodied learning. We draw a lot from educational theater, which is our background, and then also look at science integration and looking at ways that we can learn about science with our whole bodies.
Educational theater, is that something that's taught here? I mean, is it?
Not at CU. I got my doctorate at NYU, and my master's was in applied theater at the City University of New York. Beth Osnes, who's one of my collaborators for a long, should I let her in? Sorry. Okay, my bad. Beth Osnes teaches here at CU in the theater and dance department, and she does what I would consider applied or educational theater. And she and I have been working together since I was an undergrad here many years ago.
I mean, it's such a powerful idea that you'd think it would be everywhere.
I think it has started to be integrated into more theater programs, particularly as like.
Well, I'm thinking about the education program.
Yes. And I think, so in New York, where I was teaching for a long time, they don't have funding for arts education. So what you see a lot is like push in from arts-based organizations. So for example, I worked with an org called Story Pirates for a long time, and some of you maybe have heard of them. They're super fun. We would use improvisers who would take stories, we'd go into the classroom through improv, help students write stories, and then we'd turn them into improvised sketch comedies that we'd perform back. So I think that that idea has started to spread to more communities. There's like teaching artists at a lot of local theater companies. DCPA has teaching artists who will go use tools. And here at CU, we have the Shakespeare in Education program. It has a different name, but it uses Shakespeare to teach anti-bullying and anti-violence programming.
Teacher, and I had them come to my school several times.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I would say the idea is definitely growing. But right now we don't have an explicit program for that necessarily, especially not in a doctoral program, but here at CU. But Beth Osnes brings a lot of that into her work. Like she's co-listed in environmental studies and theater. And right now she has a class where she's teaching climate comedy, for example. So, and they have a show coming up on April 22nd that I'll send out to all of you.
Okay.
So, but I think it's really powerful and I find it really effective.
Well, if you study how learning is done, we learn anecdotally. We don't learn by the way most people teach.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's what you do. I mean,
Yeah.
right?
I would think so. Yeah, I think we draw a lot from like project-based learning, or basically how do we teach in ways that are going to be stickier for students?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So my goals for our time are to learn about side-by-side, to share aspects of an activity developed by our youth and some accompanying embedded codable research methods. So I'll mostly talk about those. To discuss and explore how binaries exist in your own research and to build a community of interest around binary breaking through research. So to give you a quick overview of side-by-side, we have been running this program since 2020. A lot of it grew out of interest from Beth Osnes, who, like I said, is in theater and dance, and Rebecca Safran, who teaches in the ecology and evolutionary biology department. I always miss one of those E's. And she and her lab study barn swallow evolution. So they are both co-founders of Inside the Greenhouse, which looks at creative climate communication on this campus. And they were really interested in how do we combine climate communication, art and theater and birds, and how do we make sense of that with youth? And I came into the project, one, because of my history with working in education with Beth, and my history of working with Beth, and also because I have a strange background in puppetry. That is a story for another day, but we were looking at how do we use embodiment through full body puppets as a way of an entry point with students. So over the course of what's now been 4 summers, we've explored through immersive art science learning experiences the relationship between birds and humans as a lens to look at the climate crisis. And the major, you might be like, why birds? Migratory birds in particular, which are barn swallows here, are migratory. They fly down to South America every winter and they fly back up. They'll be coming in the next few weeks. They really quickly show you what's happening to the climate. So birds are the literal canary in the coal mine in terms of the climate crisis. They show you really quickly things like micro and nanoplastics and how those bioaccumulate and tend to affect birds more quickly. And then when we see things like temperature changes or environmental changes, birds are often really clear indicators of those changes. Other reasons why we looked at birds, they're everywhere. They tend to cross political boundaries. Like most people care about birds. They're very visible and you can have lots of different relationships to them, whether it's like hunting them and being aware of the numbers of the species that are there, or observing them in your backyard, caring about how they help with pollination and all of these other things. There's lots of entry points with birds. And they're a lot more visible than, say, like a polar bear, who is really cool, but I don't know if most of you have seen a polar bear in person except for a zoo. I personally have not. So this started looking at how we can use embodied learning, artistic creation, and observation in the world around us. So we would take students to observe birds in Boulder County. and really looking at whether this type of program could increase a sense of belonging in STEM and the natural world for our participants. Okay. So past and present collaborators right now I'll talk about it a little later, but we have an Advancing Informal STEM Learning grant that's supporting our current research, and these are our co-PIs. Dr. Shaheen Radbari, who's in environmental design. So he's helping us with some of the design and research on design of the projects we're working on. Beth Osnes Sedefacher, myself, Chelsea Hackett Holden, I'm like remembering to use my new last name that was added last year. And then Dr. Rebecca Safran, who's serving as our PI. And then two other major partners we're working with right now are Environment for the Americas. They have kind of dual goals of increasing participation in STEM for Latinx students. And they do this through providing fellowships and internships at state and national parks. And then they also are working to preserve migratory bird species. So could not be a better partner for us. And they do that through hosting thousands, literally, of World Migratory Bird Day festival events across the Americas. And then we work with the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and they are located at Bar Lake State Park, which is out near Denver. And they're really focused locally on educating around bird conservation and taking care of the birds that are in our own community. And then I want to flag up our youth collaborators. These are all of our students from the summer of 2024. Something that's really essential to this program is we pay all of our students involved. So we have paid undergraduate interns who work with us in the spring and summer. And then we have paid high school fellows who come for a summer intensive. And we really see their work as valuable contributions, and especially when working with students from historically marginalized communities, ensuring that their time is valued and that they're able to come for a week or 2 weeks and not have to take a summer job. Payment is a really important piece of that. So here's our students from last summer. Here is a very goofy, fun video at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science from the summer of 2022. We skipped summer 2023 because we were beginning our ASIL funding and we're taking a short break after doing the ASIL application, if any of you have done that. And then this was our summer 2021, and these are the same students who were also involved in the summer of 2020 when we first started the program. And you'll see these bird wings. Some fun facts about the bird wings. They were all made by the students who have ranged in age from 10 to 18. They're all made from recycled materials. So we get all of the shirts from the thrift store. Cardboard is just cardboard. We've experimented because for a while before we had an access to a laser cutter, we were just cutting them all by hand. Very painful. We now have been laser cutting, and we've experimented with using like political yard signs because they're plastic and corrugated, much like the cardboard we were using. And now we use the laser cutter, which has saved a lot of hand tendons in the process. But each student was looking at a local bird species that they could observe, and they created these pieces that I'm going to show you in a second that were based off of what they learned about the bird species. So a little, I already spoke about this a bit, but this came out of two long-standing projects. One is Inside the Greenhouse, co-founded by Becca and Beth and Max Boykoff and Phaedra Pizzulo. And they really look at what does creative climate communication look like. So they're each teaching classes during the academic year, including, like I mentioned, Beth and Max are currently teaching a climate comedy class. Becca teaches a climate communication film class where students are making films about climate. And then they host an internship program, and they have several public-facing events. And then the other work that this is drawn out of was work that Beth and I have done for many years since I was an undergrad here in 2009. It's called Speak. And so we've really focused on supporting youth in self and civic advocacy through embodied methods and embodied learning. We call this program Vocal Empowerment, and it's really focused on youth advocating for themselves and civic issues in their communities. So that's been a very big undercurrent of our work, even in Side by Side. is how are youth voices supported and celebrated, and how do we make sure that youth are involved and valued at every level of the process of this project. So some of the goals and objectives of Side by Side. One is to cultivate a sense of belonging, and we mean that in several ways. Cultivating a sense of belonging in a working and creating group, cultivating a sense of belonging in STEM, which is something we've measured through multiple pilots, and we're measuring again in our summer programs and with our undergraduate interns, and then also a sense of belonging in nature. And that's sometimes, I would say, it can be different for different students. Like now that we are working with students who are from Denver, they have different exposure to the outdoors and what nature actually means. And one aspect of that is thinking about how nature is everywhere, even in concrete environments, and kind of disrupting this idea that we as humans are somehow outside of nature, which is particularly tied into our climate focus. Utilizing embodied learning, talked about this a lot. So in all of our projects and all of our programming, it's really one of the things we make sure we do is look at how are we engaging the full self in the learning environment. Inspiring constructive hope. Louise Chandra has this term, which especially with climate communication and working with youth, there is a large amount of climate grief that young people experience. And we don't want to shut down or minimize that grief because it's real, but finding ways that we are envisioning constructive futures with youth and then working alongside youth to make actionable steps towards those futures. So it's not just like, wow, I hope the climate crisis ends. It's more so like, here's what we envision as a world beyond the climate crisis, and here are real actionable steps that we could take or want our communities to take to move towards that hopeful future. And that I would say is really tied in with the vocal empowerment aspect that we've worked with. We've always kind of worked in a model of what's the current story of a problem that's important to young people right now? What's the new story we want to tell about that problem? And what are steps we want to take to move from current to new? Another piece that, again, is really tied to the vocal empowerment is providing a public platform for youth voices. A couple things that have been really important for us in doing this are really presenting youth in the best possible format. So a few examples of this, I'll show you in a little bit some films that we had made. The youth they created all of the costumes, they created all of the movement pieces, they created all of the voiceovers and the writing, but we intentionally hired a professional videographer to create the film. That wasn't because we didn't think our students could do filmmaking, but there's a pretty steep learning curve of how to make films well. So part of our perspective on really celebrating and presenting youth voices is to do it professionally and very seriously, to take what young people are saying seriously, and partnering with other professionals and other adults when it's going to rise up their voices in a different way. Another example of this, of presenting their voices and their words in a public setting, in 2022, our students had an art exhibit in the Boulder Public Library in their art space off of their exhibit space off of Canyon. And again, we partnered with them we were designing some of the printouts and like large printing, but then it was pretty cool. Each of them had a lot of opinions about how their pieces should be hung and where they should be presented. And I think that that's indicative of, finding ways to professionally present their voices and make sure that it's not just like, oh, cute art by young people, but really like, oh, young people have something to say and it deserves to be said in respected cultural spaces too. And then we talk about exploring a side-by-side approach. That I think is one of the things I was interested in exploring with you all today, because we're kind of in constant conversation around this. And it's thinking about how we have binaries that are reinforced by hierarchies, and how kind of disassembling those hierarchies helps us disassemble the binaries. One really present one for us constantly is this art science binary. I feel like you all are thinking about that a lot in Atlas. and also the power that comes to play in an art science binary. So, one thing that's been very telling for us is as people who work in the humanities, Beth and I sort of have a cap of how much we can apply for funding for these sort of projects. But coming into ASIL and coming into the National Science Foundation, we were able to apply for a $2 million grant for this project, which is nearly non-existent if you're looking solely at humanities focused funding. So part of that is really grappling with that. Like, what does it mean that we as a culture sometimes overvalue both financially and with time, and what type of research or knowledge we see as important, the sciences, and how are we undervaluing the arts? And instead of looking at that as a bad thing, how do we really tie those two together? How do we put them side by side? How do we find ways that we are learning from the sciences to inform the arts and learning from the arts to inform the sciences? And I think one thing we also kind of work around all the time is art is not just in service of communicating scientific knowledge. They both have a lot of shared things. So it's not like, how do we do a drawing about birds? It's really like, how do we draw from both of these ways of knowing to deepen both of them? And if it sounds a little esoteric, it's because it's been esoteric for us. It's been a lot of like rolling in the mud and thinking through those questions. Another thing that you've probably noticed as a theme is disrupting the hierarchical structure between adults and youth. There's a really, I'll share it at some point if it's helpful, but there's a cool like ladder of youth engagement that we've looked at before. Are youth fully guiding the process? Are adults and youth working together in a process? Are adults fully guiding the process? I think we've landed somewhere in the middle. Like I said, we're guiding this project, but we really are engaging youth input at every single point in the process. An example is our undergraduate students are very deeply involved in creating our research questions. And when we go and bring examples of our educational materials to elementary school students, we frame them as the experts in being 9-year-olds or the experts in being in the grade they're in. And it's really served us. Like, we did a project last summer, or we brought an activity that was a bird skit to a group of, I believe they were 3rd through 5th graders. And we played the bird script to them. There were like puppets of owls. And at the end, we asked, okay, you're the experts. What do you think? They were like, the snowy owl did not talk enough. The snowy owl did not have enough airtime. And we're like, okay, yeah, that's fair. You're right. And so I think again, it can sound kind of silly, but it's also genuine. Like, that makes for better educational practices to really listen to the people that you're serving on every single level. And there's different types of engagement. There's different like depths of engagement we're going to have with youth, but I think we bring that approach to every aspect of what we do. Young people should have a voice in how this is both created and delivered to them. And then this idea of humans and nature, disrupting this idea of a hierarchy of the Anthropocene and humans being somehow outside of and above the natural world. That has created, again, a lot of really interesting conversations. Like, when you're making bird puppets, you are in ways anthropomorphizing animals. So how much are we grappling with when we're overlaying human behavior onto animals? When is that useful? When is that actually really not useful? And it continues to minimize the unique lived experience of the birds that we're looking at. So I think we think about that a lot. Even in the language of how we talk about, like, the birds of affinity is what we ended up calling the birds that the students studied. And knowing that in a lot of ways, it's a one-way relationship. We can only like presume to understand our side of the relationship, but maintaining curiosity and seeing how we can learn from birds' way of knowing and being is always the goal. And then, yeah. So those are some of our goals. I was going to show you all a couple of videos, if that's okay, because I feel like since this is really embodied, it's helpful to see it in practice. Ooh, okay.
This summer, 11 Boulder youth created extraordinary friendships with ordinary birds.
We slowed down and were led by curiosity through an art, science,
side-by-side approach. Based on our observations, we created large-scale puppets and embodied their movements.
Connections between the environment and equity inspired us to use our voices to enact change.
On this art hike, we explore open space from a bird's eye view for a future that is looking up.
When a mandarin duck somehow ended up in a pond in New York City's Central Park, people flocked from near and far to get a glimpse of it. Well, I am a feral chicken. I escaped my pen in Kauai after a storm to live in the Hawaiian forest amongst my distant cousins, the jungle fowl. After needing a change in life, I started my journey to the mainland. I leaped on the backs of whales, catapulting me into the air, where I soared across the Pacific Ocean until my foot landed atop the Golden Gate Bridge. I took another leap of faith to South Mesa Trailhead in Boulder, Colorado, where I now roam free. I am never to be overlooked, nor overcooked. Forever a free bird.
Red-tailed hawks have a special relationship with each other. When a male courts a female, he will dive at a steep angle and shoot up at an almost as steep angle. After several dives, the male will approach the female from above, extend his legs, and briefly touch her. Sometimes, both will actually grasp talons together, plummeting in a downward spiral before safely pulling away. I hope to gain relationships in my life that grant me the trust of being able to fall freely together and come back safely.
Simple succulent evenings often call for some excitement. Complicated deaths that call for the praises of simple souls. Not the deaths you imagine, my friend. Your foolish shows of murderous beasts are untrue, followed by disturbing truths. Why they only eat baby birds. What? I would too. Not the shiny hogs you imagine. Fear is stronger than you think. Breathe. For your untrue gasps follow the deaths you should fear.
I chose to construct a friendship with the magpies because I wanted to understand the generally poor reputation of these birds. Magpies are often characterized as bad luck, loud and aggressive, or thieves and hoarders. Their names clouded with superstition. If one simply peeks behind this curtain, they will uncover that, not surprisingly, many of these stereotypes are rooted in fiction. With an open mind, one will have the pleasure of understanding this intelligent, attentive, and emotional species. They will learn of the funerals magpies perform for their fallen friends and of the intense bond these birds form when they mate for life. Let us make it a priority to continue forward with kindness and an open mind, because in our short time here, why limit ourselves from a world of beauty?
From a bird's eye view, I hope to know curiosity and empathy.
From a bird's eye view, I feel bold.
Through a bird's eye view, I envision a future full of hope. Through a bird's eye view, I believe we can change for a better future for ourselves, our earth, and our friends in the sky.
We do this to co-create an equitable, survivable, and thrivable future for all life and the ecosystems upon which life depends.
Back to our collaborators. So this was one in a series of 3 films that were then cut into a full 16-minute film. This was in 2022. No, sorry, 2021. And these went on. These went on to be accepted and presented at film festivals across the world. So again, I think that's part of our approach to really valuing youth voice. Like I said, all of the dances were created by the young folks. The everything they wrote themselves. but having a professional filmmaker really elevated their performance and elevated the piece so that it could go on to be shown in these respected spaces. Another thing that's been really important about this work has been near peer mentorship. So for example, we work with graduate students from they've historically been from Becca's lab and from theater and dance. And then those graduate students work with undergrads who also work with high schoolers. And now our high schoolers are creating materials that are specifically designed for elementary school students. So we're trying to have this very clear, like step-by-step way into STEM for students. An example of this is during this summer, one of the undergraduate students who was working in Becca's lab was both studying biology and also a professional ballet dancer. So we could not have been luckier to work with him. And he really helped the students to design each of their movements. And I think that that's another piece of how do we value different ways of knowing and stages of knowing. One big thing is I really like talking to my high schoolers, but I am not 18 and it shows. And I think that there's a way for our undergrads to connect with our high schoolers that's just intrinsically different. Similarly, with our grad students to connect with our undergrads. So this near peer piece is really, really important. I have a film about that, but I think I'm going to skip it and I will share it with you all if you want it so that we can continue thinking about what this has looked like with our funded research and what our research looks like now on the project. Oops, sorry. So in 2023, we received an ASIL funded grant. And again, that's advancing informal STEM learning. So if you're not familiar with the grant, it's really focused on learning that takes place out of formal learning environments. So it's not happening in a K-12 classroom. It's not about funding fellowships within the university or grad study. It's really looking at where is education taking place throughout the lifelong learning process. So that can be museums, it can be planetariums, it can be libraries. And for us, it's really some of the after-school programs that we're going into to do the research on this project, our summer program that we're running, and then also the materials that we're developing with students right now will go on with Environment for the Americas to live inside of state and national parks alongside one of their interns will serve as a docent with the materials. This is our abstract if you're interested in that. I'm also always happy to send more information about it. But the focus of this project, so over the summers that we had done the pilots of this, we were starting to see there's some special sauce coming out of this program. One of the really special things is the near peer mentorship. That's vital to this project. The other is grappling with the art science aspects. So really, learning about birds in the field from bird biologists and then writing poetry about them we did a meditation where our very talented accordion player was playing the accordion. He's very talented, yes. And we designed from these learning. The other piece I would say is, okay, and then there's something really interesting happening with these youth-made materials going into public spaces. So what we decided to do was create a program where students would generate migratory micro-exhibits. We've started just calling them trunks because they're basically a touring exhibit that has educational materials created by undergraduate and high school age youth that are designed for elementary school students that will go live in state and national parks. And what we were trying to do with these is kind of twofold. One, can we bottle up the experience of the summer program and share it with other students through educational materials? And two, we're really curious. We've seen that there's an impact on the high school and undergraduate youth when they are in this program and their sense of belonging in STEM. So we're curious if students engage with and interact with materials made by near peers, made by high schoolers and undergrads, will that impact the elementary school students' sense of belonging in STEM and sense of belonging in these important cultural spaces? And similarly, will it impact broad audiences' perception of who can be a climate communicator and what that means to be a climate communicator? So I wanted to share with you our project and research design. This is really guided by participatory action research, which you might have picked up on some of those threads, which also means that there's sort of a dual focus on the project, and the doing of everything is just as important as the research we're doing on everything. So the project aim is really to engage, highlight, and uplift youth voices as diverse youth as trusted climate communicators through the creation and wide distribution of these trunks, these migratory micro-exhibits. And then the research aim is focused on informal STEM learning and how are we understanding the impact that youth created materials have on other young people. Because surprisingly, even in educational theater, that hasn't been studied. And I was seeing this in informal STEM learning as well. We have a lot of research that young people should make art-based materials. We have a lot of research that young people should consume art-based materials. There is a pretty big lack of what does that mean when you're consuming art-based materials made by other youth? Does that have an impact on how you experience it? So our theory of action is that if informal STEM learning materials created by diverse youth are presented in important cultural spaces, then diverse youth and broad audiences will see those students represented as experts. And as a result, they'll have a shift in how they relate to who belongs in STEM and important cultural spaces. So we're hoping to generate a model for strengthening science identity through ISL experiences, supporting ISL creators and engaging underrepresented youth as co-creators. And I would say that's the stage we're in right now, is really how do we build this well? How do we make sure that the young folks who are working on this, like I said, are paid, are valued, and are genuinely involved in the development of this at all stages? And then expanding the understanding of the impact of youth-made materials on ISL audiences. And then since we're researchers in some ways here, I'll show you, this is our breakdown of our research questions. And let me just, oops, let me get rid of that at the top. Oh, it's not gonna let me, sorry. So I've mentioned diverse youth a lot, and we've been really intentional in how we engage underrepresented students. So the first project, or the first piece of this is, you can't see it up there, but we work with the Miramontes Arts and Science program, which is housed in the School of Education here, and it's a wraparound program designed to support first generation and historically underrepresented students at CU. So I've taught with them for the past several years. I've actually taught a vocal empowerment class with them. So every fall I teach a class with them that serves as a recruiting tool for our paid spring interns. Because we really want to make sure if we're working with diverse students that they have diverse near peers who are there to work with them. Then we run, so in the spring, after recruiting our MASP students and students, currently we have some students from art history who are working with us, and also from theater and dance. Then we run an internship in the spring. So during that internship program, the students are both preparing to create the trunks with high schoolers, and they're also learning about how do you do devising, or how do you lead a summer camp, basically. How do you be a near peer mentor with students? So then we have the summer intensives. We ran our first one of this last year. In the past, in our pilots, they were over the course of about a month, and we were largely working with students from the Boulder area. One of the major changes we made with the ASL funding is, again, trying to recruit students who don't have access to campus normally, don't have access to Boulder. And so in doing so, we've specifically reached out to students in Denver and are looking at Title I schools, or Title I feeder schools for our high schoolers. But that meant doing an overnight, because one of the limitations is transportation for students who aren't able to make it to Boulder every single day. So we ran it as a 10-night intensive. Students were housed on campus. They ate in the dining halls. They were on campus for 10 days, and then they were paid for their time in addition to all of that being supported. During that, this is kind of replicating the pilot studies we've done in the past, which we did with our 2021 and our 2022 group, where we were looking at does participation in these intensives increase a sense of belonging in STEM and nature for the participants? So that's for the high schoolers and the undergraduate mentors. Our other partners, the next piece is then really testing out that are the trunks able to replicate the special sauce of the summer programs? And are they doing something? Is it doing something to have youth-made materials interacted with by other youth? We're in the first stage of studying this, and we were really kind to ourselves. The first year is just looking at, can these trunks enable elementary school students to create climate communication? And I'll give you an example of what that looks like, but that's our first stage right now. So with our undergrads right now, we're identifying what do we mean by effective climate communication and creating codes that we can then code youth-generated materials to see, like, are they doing what we think they're doing? Are they able to help them make climate communication in the same way that the films were a piece of climate communication? In the following years, we'll then be looking at that deeper question of identity. Like, does seeing yourself represented in an important cultural space through youth-made materials impact your sense of identity in STEM and belonging in that important cultural space? And the next stage is also looking at broad audiences. You'll see films here. Just the funny piece. So we really audaciously applied for Type 5 as the ACEL grant, which is $3.5 million. And ACEL was like, that's nice. That's like for the Boston Aquarium. So you should go down to stage 4. And I don't know why we applied. I think we applied for 5 because we knew we were like making materials and we had done these films before. But it really took a really big pressure off of us because the goal of Type 5 is to reach hundreds of thousands of people, which sounded good when writing the grant. And now I'm like, ooh, I don't have to do that. So Type 4, the ACEL grant is research and service of practice, and it's much better suited. But it means that, yeah, I'm like, oh, I forgot to take the films off of that. We had an initial like chunk of our funds to do more professional films. We've done versions of them at a much lower budget, but that's why those are still existing. And also ACEL asked us to make those adjustments in a week. So we're like, just take off the last year and take off the films. And now we've been like, it's a better suited funding actually for what we're doing with this grant. I want to give us time for some questions. So I'll just do a couple examples of what this has looked like in practice. So for our first year, we were really working with our undergrads of like, what is a trunk? We're not sure. We said we were going to make these MMEs. What does this look like? So we took a curriculum that had been co-created by Beth and myself and Becca, one of Becca's graduate students. And we had our students take that as a basis for turning it into educational materials that could tour in a trunk. They created a storybook, which is that pictured right there. It's like beautifully illustrated that looks at the relationship between humans and barn swallows. They created bird headwear because again, like that embodied puppetry is always really important. One student made flip books that showed the coevolution where humans and birds have both evolved from the same reptilian species to have the same arm bones. So they created one of those. The human bird bone puzzle looks at the same thing. It's like a Velcro on the right bones. To one side is a wing, one side is human bones, and they're color coded to show the shared like bone biology. And then a cranky, which is a really old form of storytelling where you have like a continuous cranked story. And this shows the coevolution of birds and humans. And the cranky actually has like another box right here where elementary school students can then draw what's the next stage. What do we want our future relationship with birds to be? So that was our first, like, what's a trunk? And we brought that to some big public sharings. We learned a lot about what environments this is best presented in, and had a lot of reflection with our undergrads on like, okay, what do we want these trunks to be in the future? The next stage page that we just did. So now our interns this year, we're taking a pause on our summer intensive this year because we're kind of reshaping a lot of things to make sure we're doing a good job creating these touring materials. So our students this semester are really focused on completing the trunks that were started during the summer intensive last year, and also like iterating on older material to make sure that it can be shared out. So one example, you saw Olympia talk about the red-tailed hawk. Our students just made this, it's a long poster. And we've designed this printed out poster for our tabling events because we get invited to a lot of like World Migratory Bird Day or STEAM Fest, which was last weekend, where we get kids for like 5 minutes. So it's harder to do like, let's do a cranky and read a story. We also had one of our flip books that were like $300 walk away during one of those events. And I'm like, that's on us. So we're trying to figure out, we know that wearing the bird wings is a huge educational hook for students and parents. They're like, I want to see my kid in some bird wings. But we've been like, what's next? How do we take that learning opportunity and do something with it? So I gave that problem to our undergrads, and this is what they came up with. First, they designed each of these posters for 3 sets of the wings that we have. So this one's the example of the red-tailed hawk. It pulled from material that was written by Olympia during her summer when she was working on the project. The students also then created a meditation that the like little kids wearing the costume can hear that talks about who red-tailed hawks are, what it might be from their perspective, what they're looking for, how they might be impacted in the environment. And then they also created this set of questions for the students that are kind of a guiding set of questions. So, and I'll read you like 2 sentences of the meditation. So, imagine you're a red-tailed hawk here in Colorado. The smell of the sun-baked earth intertwines with the column of hot air that's pulling you higher and higher, thousands of feet into the sky. You look down and see a vast prairie. Even at that height, you could see the smallest of bugs and individual blades of grass in the prairie field below. That's an example. Keeps going. That's one way that we've iterated on the materials. The other, I wanted to show you what we're working on right now. This semester in particular is a trunk that's called Plastic is the New Feathers. And we're looking at the history of the relationship between birds and fashion. So these are materials that were created by our undergrads and iterated on by high schoolers as well, that replicate the Audubon tea parties of the early 20th century. So the Audubon was partially started in response to overhunting birds for hats. And so the students, elementary school students, we just tested this out 2 weeks ago and it went really, really well. They are put into role as lawmakers who are visited by Harriet Hemingway, who is one of the co-founders of the Audubon, and she says, you have to vote on this issue. We give them a bunch of primary source of fake, but inspired by real primary source materials that show different aspects of the issue. And then students use shadow puppets to speak about the different perspectives on it. So some of the shadow puppets that we do are, one is Maori people who are talking about the overhunting of the huya bird. That was a real bird that was hunted to extinction for bird fashion. We have ornithologists who, there are real documents where the ornithologist was like, women shouldn't be hunting for birds. We need the birds for our ornithology. And then we have a milliner, or we call it like a businessman for aging it down, business person for aging it down. We also have fashionistas, and youth and the birds speak for themselves. So the kids come up with shadow puppets. They share different perspectives that they get from the primary source materials and a facilitator guiding them. And then they vote, should we allow fashion feather hunting or not? Yeah. So I just threw a lot at you. I think I will stop there and leave us with some space for questions and any reflections you might have.
I'll jump in with one very quick question.
Yeah.
Are there dinosaurs in the cranky?
No, there aren't dinosaurs in the crank, but there's a dinosaur in the flip books.
Okay.
Yeah. Important question.
Killing me.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you're showing, sorry to just
middle-aged white dude. A really formative part of my own education was working with one of the world experts on Leonardo da Vinci. And the reason I got that gig was daydreaming about an encyclopedia illustration of a bird wing in flight animated. And being able to peel the layers of feathers off and then the skin to see the muscles and the bones working in motion. The daydream I had while I was reading an article on an airplane about Encarta, which was Microsoft's first CD-based encyclopedia. And I don't read well, so I was daydreaming instead of reading. And it turns out Encarta was not as interesting as my daydream. But it strikes me as heartbreaking that we're in a world now that has art and science divided when Da Vinci is an origin for both. And one of the other things about this mentor, one of the things I learned from him is that you can learn a lot about a culture by where Da Vinci appears in the library in that culture. And I don't remember the specifics, but a cartoon of it would be, say, in Germany, Da Vinci's categorized as a scientist, and in France as an artist, because Mona Lisa is hanging in France somewhere, and so they're connected more to his artistry than his science or something. And then, like, you know, he was, as a scholar, in all of these world's largest libraries, and Da Vinci's in a different place in every library because they don't know where to put him, which I also think is interesting in the context of this community, because Da Vinci's the original polymath. We all are polymaths here. So anyway, I'll shut up and
no, that makes sense. Like, it takes away from both fields by trying to essentialize what they are or separate them.
Yeah. And this binary categorization where you have to put them on a shelf somewhere. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
I'm really excited by your work.
Oh, thank you.
In a older world, one of the huge frustrations for engineering and scientists is in this inability to communicate their humanity where it really matters. And I think you're aware of Alan Alda's work trying to teach scientists how to tell stories, basically. But it's fantastic to see somebody start down at, you know, this age. And I hope that what really gets across to them is that stories are so powerful. And that if they do go into STEM, don't lose that. I think almost all of us do, right? So powerful stuff you're doing.
Thank you.
Yes, I told you I'm an English teacher and retired English teacher. And one of the things that we always tried to do in our English classroom was put up a bulletin board that talked about STEAM instead of STEM. And I noticed at the beginning you said STEAM and some parts in, but you know, the arts, I think, is so important to your project. You know, so keeping it as STEAM instead of STEM, I think.
That's a good reflection.
Critical. Because the arts, this wouldn't exist without the artistic side.
Yeah, definitely.
So focused on. And I love your project. It just sounds like something, you know, I would love to get involved in myself. It's just such a nice connection of art, science, poetry. I loved the girl's poem that she wrote. That was beautiful. So, yeah, it's just fascinating work. It sounds wonderful.
I was also just recently looking at magpies, trying to see them. Like, I hike up on Sanitas often. There are a lot of magpies up there, and I was like, I see these birds all the time. Why am I angry about them? What is this sour face I have? Her movement was compellingly like the move, like there was some real observation and dance skill in the portrayal of that. Anyway, which I'm excited about because I was just watching them. So.
Amazing. Yeah, also Uli Miller, you might recognize, she's Michelle Ellsworth's daughter, who I think has worked with Atlas quite a bit. But yeah, very skilled dancer as well. Yeah.
I'm intrigued by the near peer learning concept, and I'm curious if, like, are there traditions around that in other, I don't know, is that something that we used to do that's been lost? Like, in the, thinking about an old schoolhouse where there was grade 8, for example.
I mean, I can speak to my own experience with it. Like, I did a GT program in 4th, 5th, 6th, that we were all in the same classroom. And I think that was really normalized. I feel like that's pretty typical in like Montessori too, where you have middle schoolers teaching younger students. I don't know the history of it quite as much, but that's making me think I should research it more. But I know for myself, it was really impactful to be in that situation because we weren't thinking about distinctions necessarily by age, but there was a level of like, as a 6th grader, I have something to offer to the 4th graders. And and I think what we found is, like I said, like it's really hard to mentally make the leap when you're a high schooler to, you can respect a professor, but knowing what does it mean to like get there. And also it's going to be different, like their experience, our undergrads can speak to a post-COVID environment much differently, or to what applying to college looks like much differently than I can. So I think that's something we've just continued to value, and seen as really, really impactful. I see there's
somebody volunteered to be a photographer. I said, contact you.
Yes, please contact me.
Yes.
Yeah. Someone has a hand raised.
No, that's you.
Oh, that's me. I have a hand raised. How did I do that?
Go ahead.
I do
Sorry.
now, though. I just raised
Yeah,
my
go for
hand.
Oh, Jill did. Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I was thinking about the near peer aspect too. I think you know I love your project. If we ever talked before, but I'm wondering. I saw a little bit, but what I was wondering is what sort of traces of the fact that high school students and college students made those things end up in the trunks. Because it strikes me like if your question is, can they make stuff that their near peers are affected by? I don't know how you would answer that. But if you're looking for evidence that, I'm just thinking that you probably are building in ways that the eventual audiences see evidence that these are near peers who made these things somehow. And could you say more about that?
Yes, that is the question we're currently circling around this semester with our students. So this was the first example of that for our like tabling events, was really, okay, how do we quickly demonstrate to visiting parents and students that these wings you're wearing were made by little kids, or not little kids, were made by high school age youth. So the posters is the first attempt at that. I think maybe folks need to leave, but I'll answer your question. So thank you all for coming. The other piece right now, we have like identity boxes that go into the trunk that look at students. For our fashion one, we have a thrift store photo gallery where students talk about it. So that's something we are being really intentional about including.
Nice.
Yeah. I think the room has to be used for someone else. So thank you all to everyone on Zoom. I'm Chelsea Hackett at colorado.edu if you want to talk more.